Step away from that valve, or my team will physically remove you. The wind howled across the curved concrete rim of the Obsidian Point Dam, tearing the words from Lilith Montgomery's mouth and scattering them into the mist. She stood 5 feet away, her heels clicking precariously on the wet surface, flanked by 3 private security guards who looked more like bodybuilders stuffed into polyester uniforms. Their hands hovered near their belts, fingers twitching, waiting for a signal. Lilith smoothed the lapels of her pristine light blue suit, a splash of unnatural color against the grays and blacks of the storm brewing above us. I did not look at her. My attention was fixed on the pressure gauge mounted to the rusted iron pipe in front of me. The needle was vibrating so violently, it was a blur, dancing deep in the red zone. I could feel the hum of the concrete through the soles of my boots, a low-frequency vibration that rattled my teeth. It was the sound of 30 million tons of water trying to break free. "You have 5 seconds!" Lilith screamed over the roar of the spillway waterfalls. "This reservoir is HOA property, and you are draining our property value." I wiped a smear of grease from the pressure valve and finally turned to face her. I kept my voice low, calm, the way you speak to someone holding a grenade without the pin. "I am not draining your property value, Lilith. I am saving your life. But if you want to argue, tell it to the water pushing against the illegal pylons you drilled into my wall." She blinked, her face freezing in a mask of outrage. She had spent 15 years ruling this mountain like a queen, believing that a checkbook and a lawyer could bend the laws of physics. She did not know that 3 days ago, this was just a dormant concrete ring to her. Now, it was a loaded weapon pointed directly at her living room. She thought she owned the view. She did not know I owned the gravity holding it up. 3 days earlier, the mountain had been quiet. I arrived at Obsidian Point not in a luxury sedan like the residents, but in a 10-year-old heavy-duty pickup truck loaded with seismic sensors, laser calipers, and enough climbing gear to scale a skyscraper. My daughter, Wren, sat in the passenger seat, her eyes glued to a tablet displaying satellite topography. She was 16 going on 40, possessing a mind for structural engineering that she had inherited directly from her mother. "Look at the asphalt, Dad," she said, not looking up. I saw it. We were passing the entrance markers for Crystal Rim Estates, 2 massive pillars of imported marble that looked ridiculous against the rugged backdrop of the Cascades. But I was not looking at the architecture. I was looking at the road. A spiderweb fracture ran down the center line, barely visible unless you knew what to look for. It was not a pothole. It was stress. The ground beneath us was shifting. I slowed the truck, feeling the suspension groan as we rolled over the uneven pavement. Most people see a crack in the road and think about calling the city to patch it. I see a crack, and I wonder what is moving underneath to cause it. We weren't here for a vacation. I had received a package 72 hours prior from the estate of my late mentor, a genius hydrologist who had spent his life monitoring the forgotten infrastructure of the Pacific Northwest. He had left me the deed to the Obsidian Ring Dam. It sounded impressive on paper. In reality, he had left me a liability the size of a football stadium. The GPS led us past the manicured lawns and the 3-story glass houses that clung to the cliffs like barnacles. We reached the service road entrance, a rusted chain-link gate marked with a faded sign. Federal infrastructure. Authorized personnel only. Someone had slapped a shiny new sticker over it. Property of Crystal Rim HOA. No trespassing. A heavy padlock secured the chain. It was branded with the HOA logo. Wren looked at me. "That is not a federal lock." No, I said, reaching behind the seat for the bolt cutters. It is not. I stepped out into the crisp mountain air. The silence here was heavy, unnatural. I snapped the bolt cutters onto the shackle and applied pressure. The metal sheared with a sharp crack that echoed off the canyon walls. I pulled the chain free and swung the gate open. Almost immediately, a high-pitched whine cut through the air. I looked up to see a drone hovering 50 feet above us, its camera lens swiveling to track my movement. A loudspeaker mounted to its underbelly crackled to life. "You are trespassing on Crystal Rim Estates. Stay where you are. Security has been dispatched." I ignored it. I climbed back into the truck and drove through. We rumbled up the gravel incline toward the rim of the dam. As we crested the rise, the full scale of the structure came into view. It was magnificent and terrifying, a perfect concrete arch holding back a lake that shimmered like black glass. But as my eyes traced the curve of the rim, my stomach dropped. "Good grief," I whispered. Wren looked up from her screen. "What is it?" "Look at the rim." The top of the dam, designed to be a sterile, accessible maintenance road, was cluttered with structures. Gazebos with fire pits. Glass-walled observation decks jutting out over the abyss. And further down, anchored directly into the face of the dam, were infinity pools suspended in mid-air. They had turned a critical piece of flood control infrastructure into a private resort. I parked the truck near the control tower, a concrete blockhouse that looked like a relic from the Cold War. I grabbed my tool bag and walked to the steel door. The hinges were fused with rust. This door had not been opened in 20 years. I used a pry bar to force the latch. The metal groaned in protest before popping open, exhaling a breath of stale, damp air. Inside, it was a tomb of analog technology. Huge iron wheels, pressure gauges the size of dinner plates, and a floor thick with dust. I walked to the main release mechanism. The gears' spurs were caked in a thick layer of orange corrosion. I placed my hand on the cold iron. This machinery was designed to regulate the water level, to release pressure when the reservoir got too high. If these gears were seized, the dam had no way to exhale. It was holding its breath, and the pressure was building. "Dad," Wren called from the doorway. "You need to see this." I walked back out into the sunlight. A sleek white golf cart was speeding toward us up the access road. It wasn't a standard cart. It was lifted, with custom rims and leather seats. The woman driving it wore a light blue suit that looked like it had been tailored in Milan, not bought off a rack. She wore oversized sunglasses and a scowl that could curdle milk. She skidded the cart to a halt inches from my bumper and stepped out. She didn't look at the bolt cutters or the open gate. She looked at the mud on my tires. "We do not allow contractors before 9 a.m., she said, her voice sharp and nasal, "and certainly not in vehicles that look like that." I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped forward. "I am not a contractor." "Then you are lost," she said, pulling a smartphone from her pocket. "This is a private community. Turn around and leave, or I will fine your company $1,000 for vandalism of the gate and unauthorized entry." "My name is Ridge Calloway," I said, keeping my tone even. "I am the owner of this structure." She paused, lowering her glasses to look me over. Her eyes flicked from my worn boots to my faded jacket, dismissing me instantly. "The owner?" She let out a short, sharp laugh. "That is Rich. The Crystal Rim Homeowners Association seized the water rights via adverse possession 5 years ago. This is a private decorative lake. The concrete eyesore you are standing on is merely the retaining wall for our amenities." I looked past her at the massive body of water pressing against the wall. A decorative lake. She was talking about a reservoir deep enough to swallow a skyscraper. Adverse possession applies to abandoned land, I said. It does not apply to federal utility infrastructure. And this is not a retaining wall. It is a Class 1 hydroelectric dam, and right now it is showing signs of structural distress. She stepped closer, invading my personal space. The scent of expensive perfume wafted off her, clashing with the smell of ozone and pine. Listen to me, Mr. Calloway. I am Lilith Montgomery, president of the board. We have spent $30 million developing this rim. We have permits from the county. We have inspections from the city. We do not have time for a scam artist trying to shake us down with fake deeds. She pointed a manicured finger at the gate. Get off my mountain. I did not move. I looked her dead in the eye. Who authorized the drilling? Excuse me? The observation decks. The pools. You drilled anchor bolts into the tension face of a gravity dam. Who signed off on that? We have our own engineers, she sniffed. Now leave. I walked past her to the edge of the rim. I pulled a pair of high-powered binoculars from my case and looked down the curve of the wall, about 50 feet down, right where a steel beam for a glass deck had been driven into the concrete. I saw it. A hairline fracture, bleeding white efflorescence. Calcium leaching out of the concrete. The dam was bleeding. I turned back to Lilith. I am not leaving. I am conducting a safety audit. If you interfere, I will have federal marshals here by sunset. Her face went pale, then red. She tapped furiously on her phone. You want a war? You have got one. Security is on the way. She spun on her heel, climbed back into her golf cart, and sped off toward the cluster of mansions perched on the cliffside. Ren walked up beside me, holding the tablet. Dad, look at the water line. She pointed to the screen. It showed a satellite overlay of the reservoir. The water isn't straight, she said quietly. It is bulging on the east sector. Mom would say that is a structural scream. I looked at the data. She was right. The surface of the water was slightly elevated on one side, a phenomenon that happens when the container, the dam itself, is warping. The concrete wasn't just cracking, it was bending. We have to move fast, I said. We spent the next hour setting up the laser interferometer. It was a delicate piece of equipment, designed to measure movement down to the micron. I aimed the laser at a reflector I had scrambled down to attach to the center of the dam face. Ren monitored the laptop. Baseline established, she said. Now we wait. I needed to know how fast it was moving. While the equipment ran, I needed answers that were not on the mountain. I needed the paperwork. Lilith claimed they had permits. I knew enough about engineering to know that no sane engineer would sign off on drilling into a dam face. That meant the permits were either fake or the person signing them was corrupt. I left Ren in the truck with the doors locked and a radio. Do not open the door for anyone, I told her. If security comes, tell them I went to the county seat. I took the service road down the back side of the mountain, avoiding the main gate. The county archives were located in the basement of the courthouse in the valley below. It was a dusty, forgotten place, the kind of room where history went to die. I did not bother with the digital records. If Lilith was as powerful as she acted, the digital records would be sanitized. I wanted the physical files, the paper trail. The clerk was an elderly man who looked like he had been part of the building's original foundation. I gave him the parcel number for the dam. That is the old obsidian ring, he wheezed. We haven't had a request for that file in a decade. Wait here. He disappeared into the rows of metal shelving. 10 minutes later, he returned with a thick, yellowed folder. I sat at a wooden table under a flickering fluorescent light and opened it. The original blueprints from 1923 were there. The federal mandate classifying it as critical infrastructure. But as I flipped through to the more recent documents, I found the anomaly. 10 years ago, a document had been filed. Petition for reclassification. The request asked to change the designation of the structure from hydroelectric dam to static retaining wall. The reason listed was decommissioning of power generation equipment. It was signed by the county commissioner and Lilith Montgomery. I dug deeper. Attached to the petition was a structural report. It claimed the dam had been filled with earth and was no longer hollow. "This is nonsense," I muttered. The dam was hollow. I had just been inside the control tower. I had seen the empty galleries. They had lied about the physical nature of the structure to bypass the federal safety inspections required for dams. Retaining walls didn't need annual Army Corps inspections. Dams did. By lying, they had made the federal oversight vanish. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page. The forgery was blatant. The engineer who stamped the report? I searched his name. His license had been revoked 2 years before the report was dated. I had the smoking gun. Now I needed to get back to the dam before gravity realized no one was watching. My phone buzzed. It was Ren. "Dad, you need to get back here. Now." "What is it?" "They are blocking the road." I drove the truck like I was running from a fire. When I reached the service road entrance, my path was blocked. 2 black luxury SUVs were parked nose to nose across the gravel track. 4 men in security uniforms stood in front of them, arms crossed. I stopped the truck and stepped out. "Move the vehicles," I said. One of the men stepped forward. He was big, with a crew cut and a badge that looked like it came from a cereal box. "Private property. No access." I held up the deed I had retrieved from the glove box. "I have a legal easement for this road. It is part of the deed." "Move." The cars. A window on the rear SUV rolled down. Lilith leaned out, still wearing her sunglasses. "We obtained an emergency injunction an hour ago," she called out, waving a piece of paper. "You are disturbing the peace and ruining the aesthetic of the neighborhood with your industrial equipment. You are barred from the premises until a hearing can be set next month." "Next month?" I shouted. "You do not have a month. That wall is moving." She laughed. "It has stood for 100 years. It is not going anywhere. Go home, Mr. Calloway." I looked at the guards. I looked at Lilith. I could try to force my way through, but that would land me in jail, and I couldn't save the dam from a cell. I needed a bigger hammer. I backed the truck up, turning around in a cloud of dust. As I drove away, I saw Lilith smiling in the rearview mirror. She thought she had won. I drove to a pullout a mile down the road, where I still had line of sight to the dam face. I set up a secondary laser spotting scope. I dialed in the coordinates of the reflector I had left on the wall. The readout flickered. Displacement: 0.08 inches in 4 hours. That was nearly half an inch a day. For a concrete arch dam, that wasn't movement. That was a sprint. I pulled out my satellite phone. It was time to make the call I had been dreading. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. "Federal Energy Regulatory Commission," a voice answered. "I need to speak to Director Vance. Tell him it is Ridge Calloway. Tell him I found a Class 1 hazard sitting above a town of 5,000 people, and the HOA put a swimming pool on top of the spillway." There was a pause. then a click. Ridge? Vance's voice was gravel. I thought you retired to a cabin in Montana. I did. Then I inherited a bomb. I am sending you photos of a reclassification fraud in Washington State. I need an emergency inspection team. If you are wrong, Ridge, I can't justify the budget. We are stretched thin. I am looking at a laser interferometer reading that says the crest is displacing 2 inches a week. If this goes, Vance, it wipes out the entire valley. Send the data, Vance said. I will try to get a bird in the air by tomorrow. Tomorrow. I looked up at the massive gray curve of the dam. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the valley. Tomorrow might be too late. I drove back to the motel where we were staying. The truck felt heavy, sluggish. When I pulled into the parking lot, the steering wheel jerked violently to the left. I slammed on the brakes and hopped out. My front tires were shredded. Deep, jagged slashes ran through the sidewalls. I walked around the truck. The back tires were the same, and the sensors in the bed, the expensive, delicate seismic equipment I needed to monitor the frequency, had been smashed. Wires hung loose like severed nerves. Taped to the windshield was a creamy piece of cardstock with embossed lettering. Go back to the hole you crawled out of. We own this mountain. I ripped the note off the glass and crumpled it in my fist. Wren was staring at the truck, her face pale. They destroyed it, she whispered. We can't measure the vibration anymore. I looked at the smashed equipment. They thought that by blinding me they could make the problem disappear. They thought if I couldn't see the danger, it wasn't real. I opened the hidden compartment under the rear seat of the cab. I pulled out a small, ruggedized case. What is that? Wren asked. Back up, I said. It was a hydroacoustic recorder. I didn't need the laser to tell me the dam was failing. I needed to hear it. We are going back up there, I said. But the truck, we walk. We hiked up the ridge in the dark. The moon was hidden behind storm clouds, and the air was thick with the smell of rain. We skirted the perimeter of the estates, moving through the pine forest until we reached the edge of the reservoir, opposite the dam. I deployed the hydrophone, dropping the sensor into the black water. I put on the headphones and handed a second pair to Wren. Listen. At first, there was only the sound of water lapping against the shore. Then, underneath it, a low, rhythmic groaning sound, like a cello being played with a saw. Crack. Pop. That is the rebar, Wren whispered, her eyes wide. It is snapping. The concrete was failing. The internal skeleton of the dam was being torn apart by the tension. Every snap was a strand of steel giving way. We have to warn them, she said, even if they hate us. I looked across the water. The rim of the dam was lit up like a Christmas tree. Music drifted across the reservoir. They were having a party, a gala, right on the edge of the abyss. I packed the gear. Let's go. We infiltrated the gala from the service stairs on the west abutment. I was still wearing my work clothes, covered in dust from the hike. Wren was in her hoodie. We emerged onto the tiled patio of the observation deck, surrounded by men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne. A string quartet played in the corner. The air smelled of expensive cologne and denial. I saw Lilith near the railing, holding a glass of wine, laughing with a man who looked like a banker. I marched straight toward her. The music faltered as people noticed us. The dirty, intense man and the teenager crashing their party. Lilith turned, her smile vanishing. You. I told security to. Shut up and listen, I barked, my voice cutting through the chatter. I held up the recorder. The hum you hear at night isn't the wind, Lilith. It is the rebar snapping inside the concrete. You have 48 hours before gravity takes this view back. She stared at me, then looked around at her guests. She forced a laugh, a brittle, high-pitched sound. Unbelievable. You are just trying to extort us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the man I told you about. The scam artist who claims to own our lake. She stepped closer, hissing so only I could hear. Get out before I have you arrested for harassment. We have engineers. We have reports. Your scare tactics won't work. Your engineers are bought, I said, and your reports are forged. I pointed to the glass floor of the deck we were standing on. You are standing on a fracture. She looked down, then back at me, her eyes hard. Security! Remove this trash! 3 guards materialized from the crowd. They grabbed my arms. I didn't fight. I had delivered the message. As they dragged us toward the exit, I looked back at the dam. The lights from the party reflected on the water, masking the dark, churning energy beneath. They were dancing on a corpse. They threw us out the main gate. I stood in the dirt road, dusting off my jacket. What now? Wren asked, her voice trembling. Now we stop asking for permission, I said. I looked at the sky. A flash of lightning illuminated the peaks. The storm was here. Rain began to fall, fat, heavy drops that splattered against the dry earth. Water adds weight. Weight adds pressure. I walked back toward the truck we had left miles down the road, my mind racing. If the spillway was blocked, and I suspected it was, given the amenities they had built, then the water had nowhere to go. When the storm hit full force, the reservoir would foam. If it overtopped the dam, the erosion would undermine the abutments in minutes. We reached the motel just as the heavens opened. I sat at the small desk, spreading out the blueprints I had stolen from the archives. Wren traced a line on the paper. The emergency release valve, she said. The one at the bottom. It hasn't been opened in 50 years, I said. The gears are rusted. But it is the only way to lower the level fast enough, she said. She was right. I looked at the diagram. The manual release wheel was located on the lower observation platform, the exact spot where I had confronted Lilith 3 days ago. But there was a problem. I pulled up a recent drone photo I had taken. The HOA had built a decorative fountain over the access hatch to the valve mechanics. They had literally cemented over the safety switch. Holy cow, I whispered. They didn't just ignore the safety protocols. They buried them. I grabbed my keys. Where are you going? Wren asked. To the hardware store, I said. I need a sledgehammer and a diamond-tip concrete saw. Dad, that is destruction of property. It is rescue, I said. I spent the rest of the night prepping. I cleaned the rust off my climbing gear. I sharpened the chisels. I checked the weather radar. The storm cell was stalling directly over the reservoir. 5 inches of rain predicted in the next 6 hours. The dam was already full. At dawn, the rain was coming down in sheets. I drove the rental car I had picked up to the base of the access road. I couldn't drive up. The guards would stop me. We have to climb, I told Wren. We scaled the service ladder on the far side of the canyon, slick with rain and moss. By the time we reached the rim, we were soaked to the bone. The reservoir was terrifying. The water level was inches from the top of the wall. Waves were lapping over the edge, splashing onto the fancy patios of the lakefront homes. I saw a crew of HOA maintenance workers trying to stack sandbags around the pool decks. They were using garden shovels. It was like trying to stop a tsunami with a spoon. I ran toward the control tower. The gate I had cut open was repaired with a heavy chain. I didn't have time for cutters. I hooked a strap to the gate and the other end to a rusted stanchion, using a makeshift lever to snap the hinges. We ran onto the rim. The vibration was violent now. The ground wasn't just humming, it was shaking. I made it to the fountain that covered the valve access. It was a gaudy thing, a cherub spitting water into a basin. I raised the sledgehammer. "Hey!" I turned. Lilith was there, screaming over the wind, her security team behind her. She looked frantic, her hair plastered to her face, her suit soaked. "What are you doing?" "I am finding the valve," I shouted. I swung the hammer. The cherub shattered. I swung again. The basin cracked. "Stop him!" she shrieked. The guards rushed me. I dropped the hammer and pulled a flare gun from my belt, standard safety equipment for wilderness work. But it looked intimidating enough. "Stay back!" I yelled. I didn't point it at them. I pointed it at the sky. "This wall is going to fail in less than an hour!" I screamed. "I need to open the lower gate!" Lilith stepped forward, her eyes wild. "You are destroying our fountain. That cost $50,000. I stared at her. The water was overtopping the dam behind her, a thin sheet of liquid cascading down the face of the concrete. "Lilith, look behind you!" She turned. She saw the water. That is just overflow," she stammered. "The drains will catch it." "You filled the drains with concrete to build your tennis court," I yelled. I swung the hammer again, smashing through the base of the fountain. There, beneath the rubble, was the steel hatch. I pried it open. The wheel was there, rusted, coated in grime, but there. I dropped the hammer and grabbed the wheel with both hands. I pulled. It didn't move. "It's stuck!" Wren cried, grabbing the rim of the wheel to help me. Lilith watched, frozen. The guards looked uncertain. They could feel the shaking now. "Help me!" I roared at the guards. "Unless you want to die on this mountain, help me turn this wheel." One of the guards, a younger man, looked at Lilith, then at the water pouring over the dam. He made a choice. He ran forward and grabbed the wheel. "On 3, I yelled. 1, 2, 3. We heaved. With a screech that sounded like a dying animal, the metal gave way. The wheel turned a 1/4 inch, then an inch. "Keep going!" We spun it. Deep below us, under millions of tons of water and concrete, a gate began to open. But as the wheel turned, a new sound cut through the storm. A loud, sickening crack. I froze. The sound came from beneath our feet. I looked at the observation deck hanging 10 feet to our left. A spiderweb fracture appeared in the concrete anchor block. The deck lurched. "Get back!" I screamed. The entire glass structure, along with the patio furniture and the fire pit, sheared off the face of the dam. It fell in slow motion, tumbling down the face of the wall until it smashed into the rocks 500 feet below. Lilith screamed, a sound of pure terror. I looked at the water level. It wasn't dropping fast enough. The release valve helped, but it wasn't enough to counter the storm inflow. I looked at the blueprints in my mind. There was one more option, the emergency spillway, the one they had built the tennis court over. If I blew the spillway gate, the water would tear through the court, through the clubhouse, and through the foundations of the 3 largest homes on the East Bank. But it would save the dam from total collapse. I looked at Lilith, who was staring at the empty space where her deck used to be. "I have to blow the spillway," I said. No! She shrieked, grabbing my arm. My house is on that ridge! I pulled my arm free. Your house is already gone, Lilith. The only question is whether you are in it when it falls. I turned to Ren. Run to the truck. Get the seismic charges. We are going to blow the tennis court. Ren did not hesitate. She took off running toward the truck, her sneakers splashing through puddles that were quickly becoming streams. I watched her go, a momentary flash of fear tightening my chest before I turned back to the immediate threat. Lilith stood between me and the tennis court, her arms spread wide as if she could physically block the laws of physics. The rain had plastered her expensive hair to her skull, and mascara was running down her cheeks. But her defiance was absolute. "You are insane!" she screamed, her voice cracking over the roar of the wind. "That is a regulation court. We just resurfaced it last month." "It is not a court, Lilith," I shouted back, stepping toward her. "It is a concrete cork you shoved into the mouth of a volcano, and right now the pressure is about to blow it sky high, whether I use charges or not." I pushed past her. The security guards shifted, looking at me, then at the water cascading over the dam wall behind us. They were wet, scared, and realizing that their hourly wage did not cover drowning. "Don't just stand there!" Lilith shrieked at them. "Tackle him!" One guard, the largest of the three, took a hesitant step forward. His hand moved to the taser on his belt. I stopped and turned on him. I did not raise my hands. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a heavy, water-stained leather wallet. I flipped it open to reveal a badge. It was old, the brass dull, but the engraving was clear. U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Deputized Infrastructure Specialist. Under the Federal Dam Safety Act of 1996 and the Maritime Emergency Mandate of 1923, I am declaring this a catastrophic failure zone, I bellowed, my voice dropping into the command tone I hadn't used since my service days. Interfering with emergency mitigation on a Class 1 structure is a federal felony carrying a 20-year sentence. If you touch me, you are not fighting a trespasser. You are assaulting a federal officer during a disaster. The guard froze. He looked at the badge, then at the terrified woman in the light blue suit, and finally at the cracking concrete beneath his feet. He took his hand off his taser. "I am out," he said. He turned and started walking fast toward the access ladder. The other two guards exchanged a look and followed him without a word. "Cowards!" Lilith screamed after them. "You are all fired!" Ren came skidding back around the corner of the maintenance shed, clutching the orange waterproof case to her chest. She was out of breath, her face pale. "I got them, Dad. I took the case." Inside were 6 directional seismic charges, industrial tools used for breaking rock in mines, not for demolition, but they would do the job. I ran to the center of the tennis court. The surface was pristine green, painted with white lines, but underneath my boots, I could feel the vibration. It wasn't a hum anymore. It was a thumping, like a giant heart beating against the floor. Thump, thump, crack. A fissure opened up along the service line right in front of me. Steam hissed out of it. I knelt at the center of the court. There was no time for precision. I deployed the seismic charges directly over the structural stress points. The rain was blinding, but my hands moved with muscle memory. This was the only way to breach the seal before the wall failed. Lilith was right behind me, grabbing at my jacket. "Stop it! My house is right below this." I shrugged her off. "If I don't do this, the whole wall goes, Lilith. If the wall goes, the valley goes. 5,000 people die." I finished setting the charges and checked the remote trigger immediately. Every second wasted was a gamble with gravity. "Get back to the truck, Wren," I yelled. She didn't move. "Dad, the clubhouse." I looked up. The HOA clubhouse, a massive glass and timber structure, was built cantilevered over the spillway channel. When the water hit, it would undercut the supports. "It is empty!" Lilith yelled. "Everyone is at the gala on the west bank." "Good," I said. I finished the wiring. I grabbed the detonator and spooled out the line, backing away toward the high ground near the control tower. Lilith followed me, sobbing now. "Please," she begged. "Please don't destroy it. It is my legacy." I looked at her, really looked at her. She wasn't seeing the danger. She was seeing the ledger. She was seeing her net worth evaporating. "Your legacy is a fraud," I said. I checked the line. We were clear. I looked at Wren. She nodded. "Fire in the hole!" I shouted. I squeezed the trigger. There was no fireball, no Hollywood explosion, just a sharp, percussive crack that sounded like the earth snapping a bone. The center of the tennis court lifted 6 feet into the air. For a split second, it hung there, suspended on a column of white spray. Then the pressure took over. 30 million tons of water found the exit. The sound was indescribable. It wasn't a roar. It was a physical blow. A geyser of brown, churning water erupted from the hole, shredding the rest of the tennis court like wet tissue paper. The concrete slabs were tossed aside like playing cards. The water hit the spillway channel with the force of a freight train. The clubhouse didn't stand a chance. The water undercut the steel pilings in seconds. The building groaned, a sound of twisting metal and shattering glass that cut through the storm. Then, it simply tipped forward. It slid into the churning brown river and disintegrated, swept down the mountainside in a cloud of debris. Lilith fell to her knees, her hands covering her mouth. Her light blue suit was soaked, stained with mud and grease, ruined beyond repair. But it wasn't over. The water level in the reservoir began to drop. I could see it against the far wall. 6 inches, a foot, 2 feet. As the pressure relieved, the dam wall did exactly what physics said it would do. It relaxed. The concrete arch, which had been pushed outward by the immense weight of the water, began to settle back into its natural curve. It moved only a fraction of an inch, but for the rigid structures anchored to its face, that fraction was fatal. The 3 mansions Lilith had mentioned, the ones built on the premium lots directly abutting the dam's east flank, shuddered. They had been tied into the dam's structure with steel rebars for stability. When the dam moved back, it pulled the foundations out from under them. The first house, a modern glass cube, developed a crack down its center that looked like a lightning bolt. The front half of the house separated from the back. With a sound like a gunshot, the tension cables snapped. The front half of the mansion slid. It didn't fall far, just 10 feet, crashing down onto the slope below, but the structural integrity was gone. The house collapsed in on itself, a pile of expensive lumber and drywall. The second house followed suit, its patio crumbling into the abyss. And the third house, Lilith's house, held on for a moment longer. I saw the lights flickering inside. Then the ground beneath it, saturated by the years of leaking pipes and the sudden vibration, liquefied. The entire cliffside slumped. Lilith's mansion rode the landslide down, surfing a wave of mud and stone until it smashed into the remains of the clubhouse 300 feet below. Silence followed. Even the storm seemed to pause, shocked by the violence of the gravity check. The water continued to pour out of the spillway, but the dam itself held. The groaning stopped. The vibration in my boots ceased. The pressure was gone. I walked over to the edge and looked down. The valley floor was a mess of mud and debris, but the water was staying in the channel. The town below was safe. Lilith was still on her knees, staring at the empty space where her life used to be. You destroyed it," she whispered. "You destroyed everything." "I didn't destroy anything," I said, coiling the detonator wire. "I just revealed what was already broken." The sound of chopping rotors cut through the rain. I looked up to see 3 black helicopters banking over the ridge. They didn't have news logos. They had the gold seal of the United States Army. Behind them, a convoy of black SUVs was tearing up the access road, bypassing the shattered gate. The cavalry had arrived. But they weren't here to save the HOA. I walked down to meet them. The lead SUV skidded to a halt, and a woman stepped out. She wore a windbreaker emblazoned with FBI, Environmental Crimes Unit. Behind her were 2 men in Army Corps hard hats. "Are you Ridge Calloway?" the agent asked, shouting over the rotors. "I am." She looked at the dam, at the water pouring safely down the spillway, and then at the ruins of the luxury homes. "Director Vance called us," she said. "He said you were executing an emergency pressure release on a compromised federal asset." I nodded. The spillway was capped with illegal construction. I had to breach it to save the wall. One of the Army Corps engineers walked past me, eyeing the shattered remains of the fountain. He looked at the rebar sticking out of the concrete where the observation deck had been. "Good grief," the engineer muttered. "They drilled right into the tension cables. If you hadn't relieved the pressure, this whole thing would have unzipped in another hour." The FBI agent turned to Lilith, who was trying to stand up, slipping in the mud. Her light blue suit was torn at the knee, covered in slime. "Are you Lilith Montgomery?" the agent asked. Lilith straightened, trying to summon a shred of her former arrogance. "I am the president of the Crystal Rim HOA, and I want this man arrested for domestic terrorism. He blew up my clubhouse." The agent didn't blink. "Mrs. Montgomery, you are under arrest for reckless endangerment, destruction of critical federal infrastructure, and wire fraud." "Fraud?" Lilith spluttered. "Selling real estate on a condemned federal flood easement is fraud," the agent said, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her belt. "Falsifying safety reports for a Class 1 dam is a felony, and tampering with a federal waterway? That is 20 years on its own." She spun Lilith around. The handcuffs clicked shut. As they led her away, Lilith looked back at me. Her eyes were wide, empty. "My house," she whispered. "My equity." "It is worth 0, Lilith," I said. "It always was." They loaded her into the back of the SUV. I watched the taillights disappear down the mountain. The next few hours were a blur of statements and inspections. The Army Corps engineers took over the site, setting up real monitoring equipment. They confirmed my findings. The dam was stable now, but it would need months of repairs to fix the damage the HOA had done. The homes on the rim were red-tagged immediately, condemned. The land they sat on was structurally compromised by the drilling and the water saturation. $30 million of real estate was now worthless scrap. The sun began to rise, breaking through the storm clouds. The light hit the wet concrete of the dam, making it shine. I stood on the safe side of the rim with Ren. We were drinking coffee from a thermos the Army guys had given us. We looked out over the reservoir. The water was low, revealing a ring of white mineral deposits along the shoreline and the jagged stumps of the illegal pylons the HOA had installed. A hawk circled overhead, landing on the railing of the control tower. It screeched, reclaiming its perch. "Mom would say you fixed the cracks," Wren said quietly, leaning her head on my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her. "Some cracks you can't fix, kiddo," I said. "You just have to stop them from breaking everything else." The dam was silent now, strong. It had survived the neglect, the abuse, and the storm. It was just concrete and steel, doing the job it was built to do, holding the line. The HOA was gone. The lawsuits would fly for years, but the verdict had already been delivered by the mountain itself. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted like victory. Nature always wins in the end. If you want to see more stories where arrogance meets reality, make sure to subscribe. See you in the next one.
Just sharing some good energy today. Like the video and subscribe to Red Stories.